Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 232. The purpose of our Digging Deeper moments is to take God's Word to God's world, and we're so glad that you've joined us. If you would, take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you. Before we begin our lesson tonight, I need your help. We want to share teachings like this one with as many people as we can around the world. And you can help us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, liking this video, or sharing it with a friend. Thank you. We've been looking at the first scroll of Isaiah, which runs from Isaiah chapter 1 through 12. Last week we looked at messages 3 and 4. Today we're going to look at the 5th and 6th messages. Up to this point, it has been relatively easy to see where Isaiah begins and ends his messages. And that's been the main point of what I'm trying to get you to see, is there's clarity in where things start and stop. But sometimes in the Old Testament, and specifically in Isaiah, it gets a little harder, and it does from here. We'll have to do the best that we can while we're admitting that we can't be completely sure where some things are divided. Isaiah clearly begins this 5th message in chapter 7, verse 1. But where he ends it is a matter of debate. David Dorsey believes it should be ended in chapter 8, verse 18. I believe it should be ended in chapter 9, verse 7. Because Ahaz is clearly the king, and he ruled from 735 to 715. That's clear, but where exactly to divide this, we're going to see in a moment, is not as clear. In verse 1 of chapter 7, Isaiah writes, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to make war against it, but could not prevail." This means that the events recorded in this message took place sometime before the first Assyrian invasion in 735 BC, because all those names can be triangulated and they tell us when this time period was. It also means that the northern kingdom of Israel was still in existence at this time. Now we're going to look at the way he structured his message, because again, it looks like he's using a symmetrical or chiastic outline. But before we do that, the title is "The Real Political Concern is the Assyrian Empire, Not the Conspiracy Against Judah by Syria and Israel to the north." We look in chapter 7, verses 1 through 2. Letter A, we have the plot of Syria and Samaria against Judah. Remember, we had Israel was divided into two between northern and southern kingdoms. And what's happening now is Syria, which is another nation, not Assyria, Syria, like Syria today, was joining with Israel to the north, and they were plotting to attack Judah, the kingdom in the south. Created great fear. Isaiah chapter 7, verses 3 through 9, Isaiah predicts that the plot will fail. In verses 10 through 17, letter C, the Lord offers Ahaz a sign that the plot will fail, and that's the sign that a child shall be born, and his name will be Emmanuel. In verse 18, verses 25, letter D, which is the center and the main point of the message, is that a greater invasion is coming. The Assyrians are coming. In verses 1 through 4 of chapter 8, there's another sign that's given, that the plot shall fall. That's the longest word in the Bible, the name of Isaiah's son. I'll do my best to pronounce it. Maher Shalal Hashbaz. You can name your kid that a few times, and you call him to supper, and you might just change his name. In chapter 8, verses 5 through 10, we have a prediction, the success of the Assyrian invasion. And verses 11 through chapter 9, 7, we have a conclusion which says, "Do not fear what the people fear." Don't fear the Assyrians. Fear God, fear Yahweh. Now, I recognize how difficult this can be, and that's the reason we're putting this on the screen, so that you can see how these outlines really do make sense. And this is a typical way that Hebrews would have structured the things that they write. And it also makes it easier if you'll read Isaiah with these outlines beside you. It will help you to understand what he's referring to. Now, this last section of the message of Isaiah, chapter 8, verse 11 through 9, 7, is somewhat longer than the others, but I believe that this is the most natural way to outline. I've spent literally hours trying to figure this out, looking at the Hebrew text and reading other material, just trying to figure out. And everybody's taking a stab at it. We can't be absolutely sure. But literally, that means according to the literature and the writing, it makes sense to me to divide this at verse 7 of chapter 9. And the basic idea, however, is still the same. Don't fear the invasion, fear God. Now that leads to our final and 6th message in Isaiah's first scroll, and that's chapter 9, verse 8 through chapters 12, verse 6. The reigning king was either Jotham or Ahaz. I believe it was Ahaz. The message is directed to both the kingdoms of the north and the southern kingdoms in the south. One of the things to keep a note of in this message is this phrase that gets repeated. For all this, his anger, speaking of God's anger, is not turned away, but his hand is outstretched. This outstretched still. This is a flag. This is a red flag or a key, a hint that there is something being divided here, because it's found in chapter 9, verse 12, verse 13, verse 21, and chapter 10, verse 4. Now I'm going fast, but you can look this up in your own studies. And so this is a marker. So the first marker to look for is this phrase. The second marker is the word woe. It's found in chapter 10, verse 1 and chapter 10, verse 5. Another marker, the third marker, letting us know where to divide this, is the phrase, and it shall come to pass. I've literally spent hours on this, guys. I'm just telling you, this is something that would be hard to pick up until you really get into the text and you really see what he's doing in the Hebrew, because the words are different and a little bit different in the Hebrew than they are in the English. The English translations sometimes don't give you an exact representation of the Hebrew word. So I went into the Hebrew and to figure this out. And especially with this phrase, and it shall come to pass, you really need to look at the original language. But this is found in chapter 10, verses 12, 20, 27, and 11:10. And you begin to see, as I go over this outline, that it really does help you to see where things start and stop. So Isaiah does something else in this outline that we need to take note of, is that he doubles the second and the third sections of his last point. In fact, he triples the last section. So it starts in letter A in chapter 9, verses 8 through 12, with the denunciation of Israel. This is the northern kingdom now, because we're going back to the beginning before the book began in chapter 1. This is what makes it confusing, because this is the way Hebrew was written. It wasn't written ABC all the time. This one is definitely not linear. Then in verses 13 through 17, we have the denunciation of Israel's leaders. And between each one of these, by the way, you'll see the phrase, for all this, his anger is not turned away. We see that again in verse 13. So that tells us a new thing is beginning. And then in verse 18, verses 18 through 21, we see the anger of God toward Israel. Again, separated from the next section by that statement, for all this, his anger is not turned away. Then we get two woes right in the middle. So this would be letter D, 1 through 4. The first woe to the leaders of Judah and Israel who decree injustice. They're doing injustice with the law. Then in the letter D, chapter 10, verse 5, verses 11 to verse 11, we have the second woe. This time, now notice, it's to the Assyrians, the rod of God's anger. Now the reversal begins, and then Isaiah reverses himself, speaking of the same things. In letter C, Isaiah 10, 12 through 15, it's the anger of God toward Assyria. And then that's separated in verse 12 with the phrase, and it shall come to pass. Then we have a therefore, and I know this is complicated, but that's why it's going to be on the screen. You may want to take notes and watch this, because you can't really feel and understand this message without seeing these divisions. He says, therefore, God's anger will burn toward Assyria. He's reversing things now. Things are going to be good for Israel again. And then letter B, chapter 10, verse 20 through 23, we have the denunciation of Assyria. And if you look at these, he was denouncing Israel, now he's denouncing Assyria, which is divided with another, and it shall come to pass. And then in verse 10, he doubles it. He says it again, therefore, do not fear the Assyrians. Then we come to the first point, and this time he triples this point for emphasis. Every time you see a doubling in Hebrew or a tripling, that is for emphasis. So in verse 27 of chapter 10, verse 11:9, it's the salvation of Israel. Then it's divided with and it shall come to pass. And then Isaiah 11:10, the root of Jesse shall be a banner, and it shall come to pass. Isaiah 11:11 through 12:6, the return of the exiles of Israel, and it shall come to pass. This is a complicated outline. It literally took me hours to figure this out. And if you look on the screen, this will help you, and you'll read through this message. It will help you stay rooted in what he's talking about. Otherwise, it can get pretty unwieldy. Also note how the second half is doubled and the last point is tripled. The main idea here is for emphasis. And again, the main emphasis is found in both letter D's, that's the center, that there's a reversal. God's anger is turning away from Israel after the Assyrian invasions towards the Assyrians. But for now, we're out of time. Please be sure to check us out on our Sunday Morning Live podcast on either Apple or Spotify. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and share this message with a friend. I hope to see you next week.